What happened to you that no one believes actually happened? I had a job interview in a town I'd never been in before. Got lost and decided to park the car and walked up to a random stranger, some old man I had never seen before. Asked him where I could find name of business. He politely tells me where to find it and then says, "You're welcome, my first name and last name." I never told him my first and last name, just asked for directions. I was dumbfounded, and he just chuckled and walked off into some store. I think back to it every so often. I have an uncommon name. There's no way you can even guess it. Plot twist, the old man is the business owner, just testing his navigation skills. He failed. Story 2. I was waiting to get to the tube in the London Underground. One just pulled up, but we decided it was too busy and would wait for the next one. There was a woman who kept staring at me. Intense eye contact. She got on the crowded tube and continued to stare. She turned to face the man next to her, whose back was turned. She then licked this guy's giant afro, unbeknownst to him, whilst maintaining eye contact with me. The doors closed and the tube went away. People think it's too random to be true. The memories burnt into my brain. Story 3. I charged at a grizzly bear. I let my dog outside one night while my husband was at work. The house we used to rent didn't have lights in the backyard, so I would shine a flashlight through the living room windows into the yard when he went out. I was standing there watching my dog and he suddenly stopped and was staring at something. I whipped the flashlight into the direction he was looking, and less than 10 feet from him was a grizzly bear staring down my dog. With only a flimsy chicken wire fence between them, my mind quickly flashed to our safe upstairs, and I knew I didn't have enough time to get up there. So I ran outside towards the bear like a bridge troll, stomping, waving my arms to look big, blinding the bear with a flashlight, and yelled in the deepest and loudest voice I could muster, "Go away, bear! Leave him alone! Get out of here!" The bear was shook and just darted off into the darkness. I ran down to my dog and swooped him up and threw him inside and locked the door. In the same month, someone else in town had their dog terminated by a bear when they let them outside at night. I've stopped telling people this story because no one believes I would actually charge at a bear or they think I'm insane. But I freaking love my dog. Story 4. This is going to sound a bit weird, and it's hard to explain, but basically it goes like this. One time as a kid, I was standing by the edge of a cliff over my dad's garage. I had been climbing it with a friend. It was pretty slippery at the edge, and because of that, I accidentally slipped and fell. It was probably 6 to 7 meters down to the ground. At the ground, there was this singular plank that had been placed to rest between two tables. I literally fell down 5 to 6 meters, landed with my butt on the plank, and bounced down on the ground feet first. It didn't hurt one bit. I don't know how I got so lucky. Story 5. I fully admit how stupid this was, but I was swimming by myself in the Gulf in fairly clear water, about 10 to 15 feet deep. My parents and sister were on the beach watching me. With how clear and calm the water was, I'd occasionally go under, blow out all my air, and just sit on the sandy bottom. I can open my eyes in short intervals in salt water, so I'd look around a bit once I settled on the bottom. During one of these drops to the bottom, I bumped into something, and a giant, dark blob took up nearly my entire field of vision when I opened my eyes. At first, I thought it was an alligator, and I was a goner, but it turned out to be an equally startled manatee. I had no idea they could swim that fast. Most people don't believe me, but it was one of the most surreal experiences I've ever had. What was stupid is that I was about 200 to 30 yards from shore, and there was no one within 100 yards of me in the water. I'm a strong swimmer, but it's never a good idea to be isolated to that degree while swimming in the ocean, even on a calm day. Story 6. I nearly drowned on the 4th of July when I was 16. Parents, aunts, and uncles were around the pool and didn't see anything and insisted it didn't happen because they would have seen it. I agreed to swim with my younger cousins. They were ecstatic that a big kid agreed to swim with them. I jump in and they immediately all pile on top of me. They're pushing me down in their excitement and I'm trying to get to the surface. I remember blacking out for a second and then thinking, I'm not passing away in a freaking swimming pool. I did the only thing I could think of at the time. I went against my instincts and dove deeper into the deep end and eventually got out from underneath my cousins and pulled myself out of the pool. Story 7. My dad picked me up and we went about 20 miles out to the countryside. He was visiting a friend who had a river run through his property. Dad wanted to talk to the guy about fishing. The guy also had a little shop selling knickknacks and ornaments. My dad is one of the stingiest people alive. Never buys anything. I begged him to let me choose a gift. He allowed me just one. I chose a small, bluish Viking statue. It was half a set, but I definitely wasn't allowed to buy the woman Viking. Just one. When I got home, my mom said she had gone for a drive that day with her partner, stopped at a tiny gift shop and bought a woman Viking statue. The other half of the set. Story 8. When I was 15 years old, I was doing some babysitting for my parents' friend for pocket money. I was babysitting this little girl one night. We were watching some kids' movies in the living room. This little girl was full of energy, so she was jumping on the couch during the movie. I thought it would be better to let her spend her energy now, so bedtime would be easier, so I sat next to her during the movie just in case she stumbled or fell. Everything was going fine until the moment I decided to get up to go to the bathroom. It kinda double jumped her trampoline style and I shifted my weight so she got much more air this time. The thing is, this couch was right next to a staircase going into the basement. The railing was just behind us, leading to a 15 to 20 feet drop right to the bottom of the basement stairs. She got thrown right over the railing, head first into the drop. I threw myself at her and caught her ankle at the last second. I pulled her back onto the couch and set her down, asking her if she was okay. She just smiled at me and continued to watch the movie, seemingly unfazed by the fact that she almost passed away. In all honesty, she probably didn't realize the danger she was in at the moment. Sometimes I still think about what would have happened if I hadn't caught her. Story 9. 20 years ago in my mid-20s, a friend asked me to spend Thanksgiving with her in Laughlin, Nevada because she had no one else to hang out with. Single guy with no other plans, I made the long drive there. She's just a friend, nothing romantic. Late one night, I'm the total amateur at the craps table and start rolling dice with a really cute girl. Way out of my league. Lots of drinks, winning big, just a great time. She really knew what she was doing. Placing bets I've never even heard of. One thing leads to another and I end up back at her room. The next morning we're having breakfast and she shows me her pics in a magazine. We said our goodbyes and I've never seen her again. Yep, just your average, ordinary looking guy that slept with a model. I only told a few people, but they didn't believe me, so I decided to mostly keep it to myself. I don't blame anyone for not believing because it sounds like the most made-up, ego-boosting guy story ever. But I did end up finding the magazine with her pics, and yes, for a mid-20s guy, it did boost my ego. Story 10. When I was at uni, staying in halls of residence, I was putting a CD back in its case when I dropped it. The CD landed, not on the top, not on the shiny bottom, but on its side. Then continued to roll towards the open door, whereupon it took a sharp right and continued in a perfectly straight line 40 feet down the corridor, where it finally ended, shiny side down, in a pool of sick someone had trundled up the night before. Story 11. I went camping last year. Woke up to something pressing in on the tent down by my feet. Watched as the pressing in shook the whole side of the tent and moved up from my feet to my hip. That's when I realized that whatever was pushing in on me was a human hand. Could clearly see the fingers outlined. Immediately took stock of everyone in my tent. All present and accounted for. Jumped out of my cot. I was the only one who saw it. Everyone else told me to go back to bed. It was just a deer or something. Spent a good hour trying to convince myself I hadn't seen a hand. Bigfoot strikes again? Or at least his cousin Big Hand. Story 12. Christmas house. Must have been 2005 or 2006, after Katrina in Biloxi. I was shopping at a thrift store with my 3 little ones and we went to a Chinese place after. This kindly couple was talking to us and they told us about their neighbor's house and how they decorated it inside and out for Christmas. I got the address and directions from them and set off. I found the house, lit up and parked, and were greeted by an older man outside who said to give him a minute to see if Santa were home. We waited on the porch and Mrs. Claus came and got us. My older children, 4 and 2, were given candy canes and we were given a tour of the house. Every room had a theme and multiple Christmas trees. There were dolls and trains and decorations in every square inch of the massive place. They must have spent thousands. I didn't have a camera with me that day and our phones didn't have a camera back then, so I have no proof it happened except for the hazy memories of my oldest. My hubby thought I'd lost my mind when I got home and told him. Story 13. I was meeting some friends for dinner after work one night. We agreed to meet at a specific time, and as I was leaving for work, made note of the time. I knew I would be arriving late because of my regular commute time, which was around half an hour. I take my usual route to their place, which is a straight shot. 20 minutes go by. I should almost be there when I noticed the road was looking a little unfamiliar. I tried reading street signs and decided to take the next turn I came across. I followed the road an extra 10 minutes and end up on a main road. The same road that leads from my work to my friend's place that I thought I was on. From where I was, my commute time was around 20 minutes. I did not make any turns while I was driving. I have no idea how I ended up there. My friends were convinced I probably just drove an autopilot or fell asleep at the wheel. Story 14. There was a toy pig an old couple gave to me and my roommates. Sometimes we would throw it at each other. One day it disappeared. I knew we'd thrown it in the corner of my bedroom, but it was gone. A few days later, we found it on the top shelf in the kitchen. I'm the only one who can reach that high. Over the next month or two, that toy pig would keep disappearing and reappearing in random places. We all blamed it on each other until one day it disappeared in the front room again. My friends and I all went to the store. We came back, it was on the sidewalk in front of our house. After I left, one of my roommates threw it away because he thought it was haunted. Story 15. I was about 12. Fell asleep on a road trip for a while. Before waking up, I was dreaming we were going into a rest stop that had a nice pond area for walking and a vending machine that had Fruitopia. Woke up, but we were still driving, but my dad declared he's taking the next exit. 10 minutes later, it was the exact exit of my dream. Story 16. I don't expect anyone to believe me, as I didn't even believe in myself as it was taking place. I was at a Target about 4 years ago. This Target has 3 parking lot floors and 3 floors inside the Target, obviously. The main ground, the middle ground, and the roof floor. I had parked my car on the second floor right next to a blue Subaru Forester. I went inside and did a little shopping for a couple things we needed at home. I finished paying and I take the elevator to the second floor. I get to the spot where I parked and my car isn't there. Instead, there's a white Mini Cooper though. The blue Subaru Forester I had parked next to was still there. Right next to parking space I clearly remember parking in. Start thinking to myself for a few seconds and I decide to take the stairs to the third floor because maybe I did park on the third floor, but perhaps I misread the sign. I look around and I don't see my car anywhere. I go back to the stairs and I walk down with my 2 bags back to the second floor because I could have sworn I parked right there. At this point, I don't know if I'm either losing my mind or if my car had gone stolen. I looked around again to where the blue Forester was, and there it was. I read Central Park right where I left it. I honestly have no answers as to what could have happened, but to this day, I make sure I park on the ground level as close to other cars as possible to prevent my car from vanishing or me entering different dimensions. None of my relatives believe me, and I'm too afraid to tell my friends about this because they'll think I'm really starting to go cuckoo. Story 17. Had a dream that someone was throwing rocks from a building and one hit me on the head and terminated me. The following day, I went to work and decided to see if there was a shortcut. To be crystal clear, I had never been the direction I had now taken. Completely missed a sign saying a road was closed, went around a corner and rocks were being thrown from a rooftop. I looked up and saw one coming straight for me. Go out of there pronto. What the actual heck? I've never forgotten it. Story 18. My dog was put down in summer 2020. I fell into a deep depression and couldn't get out. Getting spiked every day and having a minimum 3 tall cans after work, alone. In February 2021, I had a 3-hour-long phone call with an old friend. Spent a lot of time catching up and I opened up about the loss of my dog. He too had put his dog down a couple years earlier, so we both started gushing about the pain and processing the grief. At one point I gave an analogy. What I said was, I just feel empty, like nothing matters. I could be walking down the street, see a $5 bill and not even stop to pick it up. My friend agreed. The phone call went on for a little while longer until he had to take his kids out to get some food. That same evening, I went grocery shopping. While I was in the grocery store, I started to feel heavy in my chest. My heart rate started to speed up and I had to do some deep breathing under my mask to avoid a panic attack. Once I calmed down, I finished my grocery shopping, then started walking home. I'd always walked the same way, but this time I had to whiz. I walked to the opposite end of the parking lot to take a whiz behind a snowbank. After I was done, I decided to keep walking in that direction to make my way home. While on that walk, I spotted a $5 bill on the sidewalk. I was shocked. I immediately thought of my conversation earlier that day, so I picked it up, snapped the pic, and sent it to my friend with a caption that said, "Look what I found." My friend replied in disbelief. I took that $5 bill as a sign from my dog, as a message from him, telling me to move on. I went home that night and bawled my eyes out until the next day. No, my depression wasn't magically gone, but it was a big turning point. I re-entered therapy next month. Left my job a couple months later, entered a new relationship in the fall after being single for 5 years, and moved into a better apartment at the end of 2021. I've told the story to some people, and pretty much everyone thinks I'm exaggerating. Story 19. When I was 5 years old, I went with my dad, my uncle, and my granddad on a camping trip at Cades Cove. One morning, the family at the neighboring tent lot to ours left out their breakfast on the picnic table and went on a hike. So a bear came by, jumped on the table, and started eating it. I, being 5, tried to go and pet the bear until my dad grabbed me. Got like 10 feet from it. Eventually someone came and chased it off. I don't remember who. And the bear jumped off the side of a cliff and rode down the side of the mountain like a slide. Bonus story. On that same trip in another nearby tent lot was a group of deaf people. I'd learned a few basic signs somewhere. I don't recall where. And one of them was the word friends. While we were eating and talking about it and I did the sign, one of them came by a lot. Handed me a small rubber ball like you would get out of a quarter dispenser, nodded, then walked away. It was covered in mud like he had dug it out from the ground somewhere. Never saw them again. That was a lot of writing for something that's going to be buried in this thread. Lol. Story 20. I saved a litter of newborn kittens after they were abandoned in some bushes near my house. One of them was crying much more loudly than the others, and after some digging through the prickly bush, I saw that one of them was clinging to a twig for dear life. The other kittens were on the ground just moping around, but this little one was almost dangling because its cord was wrapped around the twig and it was stuck. I had to do some emergency surgery, but eventually got it down and I saved them all. To this day, the descendants of that litter still roam the neighborhood as wild cats, and my own kitties are friends with them. Story 21. When I was a kid, my family would watch the lottery drawing after the nightly news. It was the Texas lottery then. I remember sitting there, and for some reason I started just saying numbers, trying to guess what the balls were going to be before they called them out. I guessed all the numbers correctly before they were called out. My family was freaked out that I did that, but laughed about it, joking that I'm picking numbers for their tickets from now on. I recalled the story at a family get-together years later, and none of them remember that moment. I remember it. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 22. One time when I was maybe 10, I woke up in the morning before everyone else in my family and went out into the living room. From the living room, I could see my younger brother, my only sibling, sitting at the dining room table with his back to me, and it looked like he was drawing or coloring in a piece of paper. I asked him something to the effect of, "Good morning, what you doing?" And he just kept drawing with his back to me. For a split second, I walked past a part of the wall, more like a column that was in between the dining room area and kitchen. In the short moment that I passed the column and looked at him again from the other side, he was gone. The paper and crayons were still there. I paused for a moment like, said his name out loud questioningly, then got spooked and ran to my parents' bedroom. They were both completely asleep and my brother was fast asleep next to them. He'd had a nightmare and slept with them that night, which would happen every so often. The way the house was set up, it wouldn't really have been feasible for him to slip past me and then quickly pretend to be asleep in my parents' room. My parents have never really believed me or thought it was part of a dream. And my brother swears to this day he wasn't in the dining room that morning. Story 23. When we were kids, we were at my uncle's vacation home. I was about 6 at the time. Anyway, I was in the swimming pool, on an inflatable boat with floaters around my arms, playing. At some point, I was like, I don't need the floaters anymore. So I removed them. So I'm playing in the boat, and then it flips over and I fall into the water, underneath the boat so nobody can really see me. I wasn't drowning because for some reason my dad teach me to never be afraid of water, and if something like this happens, I should take the air I can, empty my lungs underwater so I touch the bottom of the pool, push up and get more air until I can reach the edge. So here I am, not drowning. So what were the adults doing, right? Well, my younger brother, 4 years old, long, beautiful, curly blonde hair, is having a story of his own. He found a lighter on a table, played with it, and at some point, his hair caught on fire. In panic, my uncle grabbed him, and because he was next to the pool, threw him in the water and jumped to pick him up. When he got out of the water with my brother in his arms, my mom asked, "Where's Mike?" He turned around and apparently saw the boat flipped, and every couple of seconds my hand was bumping into it, so he knew where he was. Nobody believes this story, and it's my favorite uncle's memory. I'm emotional every time I tell the story because he wasn't the kindest and ended up tragically. I missed a lot these last 15 years, and maybe my brother and I wouldn't be there without him. Story 24. When I was 15, I had a kitten named Storm. She was a rescue. I cared for her, but after a month or so, she fell ill. I later learned that it was FPV. We were poor and had no money for a vet. I nursed her back to health the best way I could, but after 3 days, her health collapsed. I knew she was suffering, and I stayed by her side, whispering, "It's okay," repeatedly. She then started seizing. I was hugging her when I felt her twitch for one last time. I cried and cried, screaming. My dad tried to calm me down, but he eventually let me be, saying that he'll be in the other room if I need him. Don't know how long I wailed and screamed and cried while hugging my lifeless cat. Emotions started to mix in my head. All the could-have-beens, the what-ifs, the regrets. Then, nothing. I'm not sure if I passed out or what, but there was nothingness. Then I woke up in my bed. It was morning. My mom was preparing breakfast and greeted me cheerfully. I wasn't in the mood for it, and I asked, "Where's Storm?" She said, again cheerfully, "She's just there." At this point, I was almost annoyed and insulted. The cat passed away and I passed out crying over it, and Mom is all giddy and crap. I was about to lose it when suddenly Storm appeared, meowing. She brushed against my leg. Eventually, I learned it was Saturday. Again. The coming Sunday was when Storm started showing symptoms. I told my parents this, how Storm eventually passed away and how I went back and they did not believe me. Eventually, Storm did fall sick, like how it happened. Except this time I did my best to have her brought to the vet. I borrowed money from my uncle and Storm was given proper care. She survived the day she was supposed to pass away. She got better. However, a week after her supposed day, she fell ill again. This time it was so fast. In less than 24 hours, she passed away. In my arms, again, the same way I first lost her. I tried my best to make what happened happen again, but I never got back again. To this day, I've only told my wife this. I can't imagine how painful that was to go through twice. Story 25. When I was a first grader, the principal let me walk to my grandparents' house because it was 7 p.m. and no one had come for me. My mom isn't the brightest bulb, and when she couldn't find me at the kindergarten doors like before, she went to my grandparents' house to look for me. I walked there, but she went back to the school by the time I got there. No one was home, so I walked about 6 kilometers to get to our apartment complex. No one home, again. So I decided, I know the way to my mom's workplace. Walked 15 kilometers to the mall complex where my mom worked as a dental assistant. On the way, the car flipped over after getting struck at full speed. White sedan ran a red at 80 kilometers per second and struck a minivan, and the car flipped right in front of me. It hit the traffic light where I was crossing. Shrugged, got to the workplace, it's closed. My friend happens to be there. He's from a town about 100 kilometers away because his mom happened to have business in the area. She's a realtor. His mom comes out, obviously what the heck moment, and she uses an early cell phone to call the landline at my grandmother's where she happens to finally be again. Had an Amber Alert out for me. And apparently I am the reason the elementary schools in my area don't let kids out for any reason until a guardian picks them up now. I am now employed by that school board as a teacher. Story 26. So there's this guy. Let's name him M. Before I was stationed at this duty station with M, rumor mill informed me that M had filed an accident report that he had walked in front of a dish that was powered, and that he felt a wave pass through his body. Fast forward, being the schmuck that we were, of course, jokes were made. Well, one scorcher of a day where, except M, he was on leave, all working outside putting away equipment, and my memory is a little shady in the exact circumstances of the conversation, but I end up saying, I felt a piece of metal pass through my body. Not even 10 minutes later, the staff sergeant checks on us and says there's a shop meeting for us to finish up. When we're all in the office, we're told that M had ended himself and there was grief counseling to those that needed it, and I just look over to my coworker and I'm horrified. There were a few witnesses to it all, but I'm not in contact with any of them anymore, but yeah, that happened. Story 27. I think explaining to people that you were raised fundamental, especially when Christianity is so prevalent in the USA and practitioners are generally, yeah, I believe in God and Jesus and that the liberals are trying to destroy the world with their socialism and or communism. They don't understand the actual cult. So now, for instance, with Halloween looming, I get asked questions about what it was like when I was a child, what my favorite costume was, etc., and having to explain that I didn't get to do those things. No, I never got to watch that movie. We went to church on Halloween and weren't allowed to dress up unless there was some sort of play and they needed an angel choir. No one believes you unless they were raised that way too. Story 28. As a kid, various relatives used to take me on trips, zoo, museums, amusement parks, the movies, etc. One of these trips, my grandfather took us kids to the movies. Now these old movie houses date back to the days when they had live stage entertainment. Vaudeville. This old theater my grandfather took us to had an orchestra pit, even though it's never been used in decades. Seeing as how vaudeville has been quiet all that time, I was following my grandfather in the area between the front row seats and the orchestra pit. And just out of curiosity, I peeked into the orchestra pit. There was no floor. One could see into the basement. But on the basement floor was, well, you ever heard of the old Humpty Dumpty poem? Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, etc. On the floor of the basement was a large man-sized egg with a happy face painted on its shell. It had arms and legs. It was on its back, flailing its arms and legs as if it were trying to stand up but couldn't due to its egg shape. I looked away at my grandfather for a second, then looked back into the orchestra pit. This time the painted expression on his face changed. Now the painted expression was one of grief and frustration. The eyes were closed and the mouth was in a grimace. I looked away for a brief second or so and looked back into the orchestra pit. This time there was no egg, just the bare floor of the basement. I looked away again, just for a few seconds, I guess looking to tell someone what I saw, but then I looked back into the orchestra pit. This time the orchestra pit floor was there. I couldn't see into the basement anymore. The orchestra pit floor only had a small handful of wooden folding chairs on it, nothing else. As the years passed and as I was going to the movies on my own, sometimes I went to that very same theater again. Each and every time I did before the movie started, I'd go take a look into the orchestra pit, but I never saw anything like that again. Just the plain old, bare, empty floor, not even chairs of the orchestra pit. That old theater is now gone, a typical victim of the expansion of home video and cable TV. Story 29. Once, while walking to a gas station late at night to buy a pack of smokes, someone attempted to mug me. I had headphones on, so I didn't notice him running up behind me until he armed me in the left arm with a screwdriver. When he harmed me, I immediately spun around, hit him, and knocked the guy out. Just straight up cold clocked him. Dude crumpled on the sidewalk, and being the big softy that I am, I decided to make sure he was alright. Shifted him a bit on the ground to make sure he could breathe and waited for him to wake up. When he woke up and I talked to him, found out he was a user who had spent the last of his money in a fixed days before and was desperate for some food. So rather than going to get smokes, I walked with him to the store and bought him some groceries. Story 30. I went bowling on a Saturday afternoon with my housemate's girlfriend and a friend. My housemate was out of town. We proceeded to get hammered on cheap beer and went back to my place. Girlfriend's friend basically insisted that we play Twister. We all ended up completely and then the punishment for losing a round became spankings. Eventually, the girlfriend went to the bedroom and came back with soft leather whips. The part no one believes is that I didn't have intimacy with either of them. As it was, I was so intoxicated I had a brewer's droop, and a couple minutes into the whipping, all I wanted to do was go to sleep. Housemate heard about it when he got back and thought it was hilarious. Also gave me crap for not sleeping with his girlfriend's friend. Story 31. Saw a UFO. In a grocery store parking lot, I was with my mom and was 16. We're loading groceries in the trunk of her car when I see a circular disc-shaped object come to view in the distance. It had an odd shade of pink and green lights around its perimeter, giving it a wild-looking glow. It was flying in a straight line like a plane would, but then stopped and hovered in place. I'm just staring at this point, hoping my mind will catch up to my perceptions and make sense of this. It then does a little vibration and shoots straight up into the air, disappearing at a very fast speed. The part that still gives me chills, though, is the reaction by everyone, including myself. Right after it disappeared, I stared at the empty sky where it had vanished for maybe 5 seconds. Then I slowly looked all around me to see that every person in that parking lot was doing the exact same thing. In complete silence, everyone looked around at everyone else, completely frozen and expressionless, for 8 to 10 seconds, and then, as if programmed to do so at the exact same time, everyone carried on with what they were doing like nothing happened. My mother, one of the most conservative humans ever on the planet, is beside me, and when everyone carried on, it gave me a super weird, uneasy feeling. And I said, "Mom, what the heck?" She told me to just get in the car, and she flipped out a bit then. She was sure of what she'd seen, as was I. Years later, I found a handful of people that say they witnessed this too. Without knowing my or any of the other experiences, they told the story precisely as I had. I told several people about it, of course, and reactions mixed. I told them if I was making up a UFO story, I'd certainly be more creative and make it a bit more exciting than seeing one from a Kroger parking lot with my mom. Never seen another since, and often wonder what the hell we saw that day. Story 32. My high school teacher was into spirituality, apparitions, telepathy, etc. One day, she said in class we would play a game. She wrote the name of one of the students in a piece of paper and put it on her desk upside down, and she said, "The person whose name is written here will stand up without any hint from me." After a few minutes of uncomfortable silence, I was convinced it was me. I stood up and it was my name. I do not believe in any of this stuff and have thought for years how it could have happened. Did she know us that well that she could predict who would lose patience or who would imagine their name was written? Or was it some plot to mess with my head? I never saw the paper, but a bunch of other students did. A few people in class accused me of conspiring with her, or that she gave me some sort of sign, but none of that is true. Story 33. My wife never believed me until she witnessed it, but no one else believes me still, even with her testimony. I had a cat a long time ago, probably the coolest cat my mother ever owned. I must have been about 17 at the time. His name was Scar. I swore to my wife, then girlfriend, 22 years ago, that the cat could say our names to let him in the house. She never believed me, just thought I was trying to say unbelievable things to impress her. Well, the day came when her parents allowed her to stay over at my house. We were laying in my bed and I heard that cat come up on the back deck. "Quiet," I said. "Might hear him say my name." Now, when he would speak our names, he didn't sound like a cat. He sounded like some weird alien creature. Quite creepy. He came to the window and sure enough, the cat said my name to let him in. "Oh my God, don't let him in. I'm scared," she said. Creeped her out so much he just clung to me the rest of the night and didn't sleep. She was not so lovely to my cat the next day either, like she usually was. People still don't believe me to this day, even though my wife will say, "I didn't believe him either." Story 34. When I was 6 years old, I was visiting my aunt's very large property in Arizona. It was basically farmland, and she had built a large practice arena for her horses in the middle of a large pecan grove. Being an idiot kid, one of my favorite things to do was to try and walk the perimeter rails, like a tightrope, without falling. After about 10 minutes, it started to rain. Expert mode, I thought. Well, at some point there was a flash, loud noise that was abruptly cut off. I've seen the effects in movies, and my god, is it accurate. Followed by me waking up a few feet away with my ears ringing. I looked up and the fence of the arena had a portion of blackened, sort of twisted metal. Ran inside and found my mother and aunt and yelled, "Hey guys, I think I got struck by lightning." "That's nice, honey." They didn't believe me at all, but I remember not really caring or pushing the issue. They found the damaged fence later and chalked it up to something else. I sort of repressed the memory until the next thunderstorm almost a year later sent me running inside, shaking in fear. I had to go to counseling for a while, and my folks still don't believe it happened. Story 35. Mine's a bit of a weird one. When I was little, we took a trip to Florida. My grandparents had a condo we stayed at. We were all at the beach one day when a big black lab came running up to us and started playing. There's no one in sight. The few people that we saw said the dog wasn't theirs. My parents checked his tag. There was a number, so they went back to the condo to try phoning his owners, thinking maybe he'd gotten out. This whole scenario goes on for about 2 hours or so. We didn't just want to abandon him at the beach. So I played with the dog the whole time. His tag said his name was Shadow, and I have to say I made a fast friend that day. About an hour and many more calls after that, we really have to get back home and we wonder what to do with the dog. My grandparents went back to the condo and my parents packed up to go back as well, and the dog seemed to take a hint and bounded off along the beach, happy as can be. He didn't seem scared or anything, so we hoped he'd just find his way back home to his owners. I was reminiscing recently and brought up Shadow to my parents, who just looked at me with the most confused faces I've ever seen. They had absolutely no clue what I was talking about. They both claimed without a doubt that it never happened. I've never felt so genuinely crazy in my entire life. Story 36. I once lost 40 pounds in a week. I posted this a couple of times on Reddit and I've always been downvoted for it, but it's true. I was super underweight when I was in my mid-20s. I just gone through some trauma and was 90 pounds body weight. So I spent a year powerlifting and doing a dirty bulk where I tried to eat enough to gain weight every day. I eventually made it to 200 pounds, but got to the point where I couldn't gain any more weight. I was physically eating as much as I could, but kept burning off weight, so I decided to stop. I ate clean and continued to do my powerlifting routine, and in 1 week, I'd lost 40 pounds where I sit to this day. I think people really underestimate how much energy muscle takes to maintain. I can lose more weight easier now that I've bulked up because my body burns more calories. Story 37. My 4th grade teacher won't let our class go downstairs in a real tornado warning. The siren went off and all of our peers went down while we watched. If we said anything, she'd yell at us to be quiet. After what seemed like forever, she called the office only to be informed that the siren was real and we had to go downstairs. We were on the 2nd floor and protocol was to go down to the 1st floor into the 2nd grade classroom. I held her, the office or administration, and the teacher of the 2nd grade classroom we were supposed to be in, accountable. An entire class of 4th graders was missing and no one thought to check where we were. She should have been arrested for child endangerment and they should have reported that something was wrong. I'm sure many of us told our parents, but they didn't believe us. My mother still doesn't believe me, as she was more upset at my teacher for not knowing my name late in the year than her literally risking my life. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're gonna love this. Catch you in that video.